Okay,
I can't either, thanks.
we'll notify everyone that they're being
The
recorded.
meeting's being recorded. Sorry for we can just recap that the meeting was opened. We found the minutes to be requiring a revision. That revision was accepted and voted upon. The minutes are now approved. Okay, so, okay, we're all good. Yes, sir.
I noticed in the agenda, there wasn't a specific place for requesting addition to the minutes.
Addition to the minutes. Well,
Excuse me, to the agenda, I misspoke.
generally speaking, we don't put additions to the agenda as an item on the agenda. I mean, that's not been my practice. The agenda is the agenda. I'm sorry, I'm a little confused here.
Well, in particular, there's nothing on how we organize ourselves, either as a committee of the whole, or as I would suggest, several subcommittees to deal with particular areas. And I don't know how to bring that up.
Okay, all right. We'll find an opportunity in a future meeting to get that on the agenda. Okay.
Well, let's deal with the question of the agenda. I think it's a valid question. I think the right process is to, and correct me if I'm wrong, the right process is to submit your ideas about agenda items to the chair. Let the chair think it through and maybe talk back with the person who's got the agenda item and then make a decision as to whether it goes on the agenda or not. So the
this
agenda,
is outside
before the
the
agenda
meeting.
is created, this would happen outside the meeting.
That's a perfectly good process. There are several processes in use, so we should select one and use it.
Yeah.
I was just reading out what I think the standard approach is.
That's what we
Concord meetings.
That's what we typically do on the Climate Action Committee. We email the chair. However, question for open meeting law is if we want to add things to the agenda, is that a message directly to you?
It's directly to me,
Not
because
to
you
the
can't, it's not to the group.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's directly to me. I set the agenda and then we operate our meeting according to the agenda.
The other way to deal with something that isn't on the agenda but needed to be on the agenda and was put on it for some reason is to bring it up under new business. I believe that's valid, is it not?
Well, I need an item on the agenda.
I don't see new business.
Well, should we have new business on the agenda as a placeholder for use in the event that we need to tackle something?
Okay, so my understanding, and you know, we're all talking about open meeting law and our understanding of open meeting law. Open meeting law, I believe, indicates that the agenda is indicative of what the meeting will be about. It is possible to go, so to speak, off the agenda. You're allowed to talk about other things, but you need to find an opportunity to let the public know that something, especially if something of substance, will be discussed. You may have to defer further action on it or something, so that there's an opportunity for the public to at least be aware that you're talking about something. So new business is very general. And you just, you know, it doesn't tell the person anything. Like, let's say we want to talk about a specific site, let's just say. And we think that that's important to talk about. That site needs to be on the agenda as a specific thing so that neighbors or anyone else who cares can show up. You can't just say new business and then all of a sudden have a very substantial conversation about a particular site.
I think we had new business in the building committee.
Yeah.
I think we had a
Just
placeholder.
a
for that.
placeholder.
But I see your point. I think it's a good point.
So, yeah, as I said, I think there's an opportunity in the open meeting law for you to talk about things that are not on the agenda, but I do think we need to be fairly crisp about.
And I want to confess that this is my first exposure to the open meeting law.
Okay, all right, that's fine, you know.
Well, you could use that slot to both new business.
Yeah.
For anybody who wanted to suggest an agenda item for the
That's all set.
next
Yeah,
meeting.
Right,
Yes.
future
So you
agenda items.
Yeah,
wouldn't
yeah.
be,
Like that, okay.
you
I
wouldn't
would
be
still
deliberating
prefer,
on it.
I would still prefer that go through the chair, okay? Okay, so we're on to the next item, which is the chair's report. I don't have a whole lot because we have only had the meeting to set ourselves up, but I do have a few items I did want to touch on. There's no item on the agenda this week for correspondence. We did receive correspondence from one citizen. We've already taken some action on that from Ms. Gallus. But in the future, I will put correspondence just as an item, just to make sure that we don't forget to mention if we've gotten anything from citizens. That's number one. Number two, I'd like to have us create a mail and phone list for the group so that we know how to reach out if we want to talk to another member. I'm not advocating that we create chain discussions which might violate open meeting law, but it's always a good thing to be able to just talk to another member if you want to. So if you could just send me your preferred email address, your preferred phone number, and I'll just post it out. I'll create a little spreadsheet or a little table and send it out so everybody has everybody's contact information. So there was other thing I wanted to just clarify and make sure everybody's up to date on. It's our first real formal meeting. I just want to show of hands. Has everybody done their conflict of interest training that you have to sign up for? Yes, yes, yes.
Started, haven't finished it.
Okay.
I was unable to get online to do it. It blocked me out.
It blocked you out.
Ah.
Okay. Right.
It blocked me out, and because I was not in the original list, because they had to get special permission
Okay.
to allow me to be on this committee because I'm on the building committee. So,
I see.
so I don't know.
Okay.
What do you
Did you have
want
to
to
do
do?
it? You must have had to
But
do
you
it
had
for the
to do-
building
yeah.
committee.
Right.
I think you don't have to do it all.
So mine's due to be done again in
Exactly.
January,
Once
right?
every,
Mine's
like,
already
year
been
or
done,
so.
every
Right.
couple of years, yeah.
Well, I'll call
Every
every
2 years. but
Yeah.
that's
So,
okay.
Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah. So conflict of interest training, we're in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to point out is that we do have a page within the Concord website.
Yeah.
It's a little proto at the moment. I've asked Donna to sort of work it up so that there's a way that anybody coming to that page can find a way to contact us. Just to send, people don't necessarily have my personal email. And I would love to see, like, at the light board, they have LB chair at concord.gov, and then it gets rerouted to whoever the current chair is, for example. So just some kind of like pass through that gets to us
Yeah.
so that we can get communications from citizens, especially someone who wants to send something to the whole committee, and not just to the chair.
And it also copies the staff liaison.
Yeah,
Yeah.
staff people, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I've communicated with Donna McIntosh about setting something up so that we have contact capability. And the other thing that our site doesn't have and it needs is a way for the meeting packets to be available.
Yeah.
Right now, the meeting packet for this meeting is available. If you go to the calendar link, the calendar link has the meeting packet, and then you can also get the agenda, but the meeting packet is posted at the calendar link. That's not a very good way to find things in the
I like to do
future.
it that way.
It'll roll
Yeah,
off to
yeah,
last
right,
month and be
right.
gone, and no one
Okay.
will be able to find that link ever again.
Yeah.
So we need to set up a way where our meeting packets are also online and available.
Have we
That's a good-
considered the possibility of developing public visibility by having from time to time coverage in the Concord Bridge?
That is something we can certainly do. Yes. I mean, if we want to have what I would call something of a PR function for what we're doing, we can certainly
That's
send
fantastic.
out notes.
Yeah.
The building committee that Charlie's on does that on a regular basis. They just send out a regular update. This is what we've done. The school committee does the same
Yeah.
thing. Sometimes they're in the Concord Bridge, sometimes they're not. They're space provided. They will, I'm sure, provide information regarding.
We'll need a lot of public support. We need various ways of
Getting.
encouraging it.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. It's a good point. Thanks, Phil. That's my chair's report. Anything else?
I just noticed that it looks like, I thought that chat wasn't activated, but it looks like it is, and there was
Just hands raised or something.
messages, so I didn't know if you wanted to
See those or discourage chat?
We're done.
The little
Down
red
the bottom,
on the
on the
chat,
middle.
it's a little indicator.
Number 2, I think chat is normally disabled for
Who's that?
committee
Oh.
meetings.
Yeah, we should probably disable that.
But I just didn't know if you
But
wanted.
let's see what's.
No, leave it enabled, please. It's a very good way of communicating.
The committee,
We're not gonna keep up with a real-time chat, honestly.
You can communicate amongst yourselves. I'm not sure
Yeah,
the committee should see
yeah.
these.
I don't know
No,
what-
we can't. It only goes to Eric Sims. That's it. We can't see what we post and we can't chat with each other, but it allows a direct communication one way to you from us.
We're not gonna be able to respond to that in real time, so.
I think it could be.
You don't have to. Just,
Just
just,
there's a volume problem or something.
Okay, all right, whatever. Okay, that's really it for my chair's report. We had some correspondence. We're gonna assemble an email list. You're doing your conflict of interest training, and I'm gonna be working with Donna to develop an improvements to our webpage so we can track what we're doing in the committee. Next agenda item. So we're on to the 2229 Main Street opportunity. Mary Hartman alerted me, and the 2229 Main Street Committee is actively, pursuing uses for that site. Now, there's obviously the problem with the 2229 site that we don't own it. And that's a much bigger question that the select board is wrestling with. But we are still looking for places to install solar, and it's a nice brownfield site. And if no one else has any real claim on it, we would certainly want to know what's going on and possibly be able to utilize some areas of that site, or potentially create some sort of overlay where if any hardscape is built or any kind of buildings are built, that they must include X amount of solar. So it would be helpful for us to create an observer person who is paying attention and watching what they're doing. Does anyone have any interest in being our observer to the 222? Charlie, would you like to? You are already on another committee, but that's fine. You're happy to do it?
Yeah.
Okay, we have a volunteer. All right. So that's great. Thank you, Charlie.
I don't necessarily have to do it for the entire duration of the. Right, but I will start
But
doing it, yeah.
the idea really is
Yeah.
so that,
I like
we have a seat sort of at the back of the table, not at the actual table, but we're there and we can pay attention to what's going on. My battery is going to run out. I don't. Right there. Got all the toys.
Do we know who currently owns that property?
That is not clear. That's the $64 question, Bill, quite honestly. It's 229? Yeah, 229. What did the EPA actually has ownership? They have title.
They have control over it, and they
They
would,
have control.
they would sell it to the town.
Right.
The next step.
They
That's
have
what the
the
task
right
force is
to-
working on now, a
Yes.
recommendation on should we buy or not,
Yes.
and what
Yes.
those risks are. Right.
So it is, it's, that's above our pay grade, whether or not the town decides to take ownership, fee simple or whatever, for the property but we would certainly like to get our solar opportunities maximized on the lot, if possible. So
That is the StarMet site.
Yeah.
that's the
Okay.
StarMet
So
site. Yeah,
everybody
yeah,
knows.
yeah, that's the.
And I think there is going to be a public forum for, on that topic of usage.
Yeah.
At least I thought I'd seen it. I don't know when it is. Charlie probably knows better than I, but
I take it they're competing potential uses.
yeah, and then the town actually had a task force looking at it and they inventoried, including town staff, the uses. So there's a document.
There is a document.
There is a document that we can all look at to see that.
They've
but
identified
they won't
multiple
refresh it.
areas, A,
Right.
B, C, D.
Yeah.
They've said these areas, A, B,
Yeah.
C, D, have these potential possible uses. Everything from this is wetlands to this could take, business
Recreation.
buildings.
Yeah.
This could be
Yeah.
recreational,
Yeah.
could be multi-family housing. There's a lot of potential over there. But if very little of that comes to pass, then solar is definitely an opportunity.
Yeah, solar was definitely high on the list. Right.
So, yeah.
Is solar permitted in wetlands?
The answer to that, I think, is pretty much no. I mean, I think that Concord has a very severe wetlands setback rule. If you're within, I believe it's 50 feet of a wetland, there is literally a no build rule. You could not have anything structural within 50 feet of a wetland. So that means in a wetland is a 0 and 50 feet of a wetland is pretty much a 0. So, and then 25 feet is no touch. It's like you can't even mow or do anything.
I'd like to add, so you mentioned the 229 is a great place for solar.
Yeah.
I think it's an even better place for energy storage.
Brian,
Oh, that
as a
too,
member of
yeah.
the public,
Yeah.
you're gonna have to maintain your at the back of the table. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay, but I hear you. You can bring that to the party at the public comment moment. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we've arrived at a volunteer, and I think we can pretty much close out this particular topic. And Charlie, we look forward to maybe a 2229 report.
Yes,
And
definitely.
periodic
Yes.
report as an
Well, you can
agenda
have it,
item.
you could have it listed as a standard agenda. item.
Standard agenda item, 2229 status or something. Yeah, fine. Okay. Okay. So the next item on my list here is if we were to take the really well done document that Laura Scott handed us as a starting point. It starts with a kind of long introduction, but it's a little meandering and it doesn't really crisply lay out what is our mission and what are we trying to do in our final reports. You know, we have taken on, as you know, the warrant article indicated, a set of priorities, and you know, among them are trying to find another, it was stated over 12 and a half, and I think we're now with the CMS, we're at 11 or 11-ish that we're looking for megawatts of solar generation in the community on town-owned land. And that sort of was the going in proposition. Any rational view of what's really available and what really could be developed is going to require us to possibly think outside of that box. It may require us to think about looking at sites where we're partnering with businesses, where we're looking at large hardscape areas that could be potentially utilized, or rooftop areas that could be utilized in partnership with a private entity. Even though the arrays may still be owned and operated by the light plant, we would be potentially thinking about expanding our scope slightly to include other properties beyond town-owned land. So I think that it's incumbent on us to sort of come up with a preamble to what our report and what our mission really is going to be. How are we going to proceed? What are we anticipating that our output is going to encompass? There are obviously different characteristics of what we got to worry about. We have to worry about, can we find the land? Can we afford to put it there? Is it technically feasible, et cetera? These are details of what we're trying to do, but we need a big sort of like opening statement that says this is what our goals. This is our agenda. And yes, sir.
If you look back, as we all have, back to 2011, there's a consistent pattern. A lot of relatively ambitious ideas and no action.
Right.
And so if we made a decision now to have a specific goal at a specific time, for instance, to have one or two initial projects for approval at town meeting, we would be able to meet that. No other group has taken on such a specific time base. And I think that's the reason that the reports are nicely written and have produced nothing.
That is, if you look forward to the agenda, I'm proposing a dual track where we do focus on a targeted solution and a practical, implementation
With a timeline.
with a timeline. But we also have a broader problem of trying to map out how we get all the way to our goal. And that is by identifying more than just one or two places to put a few panels and identify larger sites with, with a punch list of what do we have to do and when to get to the target.
Well,
So that I think is really the purpose of the whole thing.
But
is
I agree
this
with-
larger problem.
I agree with the comment you made of the high priority, because momentum is the one thing that every other similarly tasked committee has not
That's-
implemented.
That is true. That's true. And it is part of our charge. Our charge does ask us to focus on at least one,
Mhm.
priority project that's achievable and that we can move forward with.
Now,
So
we're committed to one project at a minimum.
Yeah.
That becomes, in an implementation pipeline. Before we wrap up the deliberations of this committee, let's say in a year, so it's within 1 year,
right.
we should have something
So
that's moving.
we should have something stood up.
Into project state.
Yes.
But I'm proposing, for momentum reasons, to have an even more ambitious goal of having something to present for approval at town meeting.
Well, I think
Time-wise
the
is
town
a
meeting
little-
is a requirement only if we'll go to town meeting only if we have to. So certainly we would go to town meeting to do what we would need to do. But if you could avoid it, that's even better, isn't it?
I'm not
Funding is
sure.
probably gonna be an
If
issue,
we-
but
I don't think
yeah.
we're gonna do
I-
anything without.
without
getting
any
it
money,
to town meeting.
right,
I think it's gonna be unlikely.
fair.
And
Yeah.
if you found the most attractive project with the most public support and got it approved at town meeting, that's what I mean by momentum.
Chris
Yeah.
Whalen had all those sites already pre-approved. I'm not saying we're gonna pick one off that list, but we do have some pre-approved,
But nothing
Nice.
happens.
but nothing happened. Yes, right, that's right.
Can I ask our long-term, we're targeting 11 megawatts.
Yeah.
Do we need to, as a result of our review, project what it would cost? To-
We
So,
absolutely.
yeah,
Right,
I don't
so
think-
that you can reference that cost against other options
Yes.
or other priorities that may come up from other committees or other things, so that we have a fuller picture of what that full commitment would be?
And not only does that matter, but I think it would be incumbent on us to have an analysis as to what that means for CMLP rates, that the ratepayer would end up, what kind of impact,
Taxing
it's likely that if we end up with debts and debt service, that will be taken on the light plant's books, and then they will build that into their rate
Right.
structure rather than have it be direct taxation. And then, we just.
Because I'm assuming that the priority, how we prioritize these is, there's some simple ones, but they might be more expensive than other ones that might be long-term.
Right.
You have to look at them both from cost as well as complexity.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Is there in fact a possibility, and should we be looking at it in terms of either federal or state funding, which therefore is off of our books? Is that something that you feel we should look into?
I think it's incumbent on us to, and some of that stuff is time-based. In other words, you
Yes.
have a certain window in which you can apply, et cetera. So that is something that we would probably need to do. But for the moment, on this particular agenda topic, I want a broad brush sense. I guess I can craft it, or if anybody wants to volunteer, but a paragraph or two that says, these are the objectives that we are setting out as a committee to achieve. Now, Phil, you've pointed to one thing, which is like, we want to have a project, and we want to have progress, and we want to see, momentum. But there are other pieces to the puzzle that I think that we will also focus on. And so this paragraph or two should just touch on what those will be, so that we have an introduction to our report. And it will also guide us, if we all agree on it, we come up with some language that we all agree on. the reason that, there's gonna be some puts and takes, there's gonna be, are we gonna be concerning ourselves with battery storage? Is that within the purview? I think it's within the purview. It depends on how much we want to focus on something like that. Are we gonna focus on public-private partnerships, et cetera? So we have to craft and agree that these things are within the scope of what we're trying to do. And some other things are outside of the scope of what we're trying to do.
So, Dean,
I
can I
will be
just
happy to.
Can I ask a question? Because we have a charter
Yeah.
and everything you just said is in this charter.
Yeah,
Do we need to go through this in more detail and really hash out and really say,
well, I'm wondering
are
if
we
we
gonna
need
do
to,
this or interpret it? Or,
I'm wondering if we need to, in our interpretation of our charter,
yeah,
sort of expand a little here, a little there, because there's nothing in the charter that says anything about talking to private businesses about their.
Well,
well,
it
it
is.
is, it is actually. in
There
here,
is, you're right, there is,
private
you're
farmers,
right, yeah.
battery storage and the technical
storage,
limitations and a
technical
short-term
limitations,
project,
owns
it's
everything.
it's all in here.
So if we just want to recraft the charge into something that looks like an introduction to our report, that is something that would be perfectly acceptable. I think that the current introduction, it meanders around about the
Oh,
complexities
in
of the
this
distribution system and
This
yes.
is the CMLP's
Yeah,
report,
exactly.
right? It's
Yeah.
not ours.
It meanders
Right.
around about
Yep.
a bunch of things that are not necessarily part of what we're trying
If
to
we
do.
are going to do some recrafting, I would strongly suggest that in whatever words we want to use, we want to avoid the fate of the 2011, 2020, all the committees who've done good work and accomplished nothing.
Okay, so that
Well,
will.
I almost think, along with what Wendy has said, that we do have a founding document.
Right.
We have a charter, and that's what we're really all about. And I think I've thought about this, in terms of until we have a problem with that charter, in terms of its boxing us out of doing
Yeah.
the things we want to do.
Yeah.
I think I think we're pretty much in good shape.
Okay,
Because I think the charter is very broad, very open to
Yep.
inclusion of anything that would be an impediment to our completing building out an opportunity.
Okay.
So that, for now, I'm
Yeah.
comfortable with that charter.
okay. So we don't think we need to, because
Until we have a problem.
yeah, I took the draft 2.0 and looked at the way it was introduced, and I said, this is not,
Yeah.
it's not the way the final report that we will end up producing will introduce itself. We need to be more true to our charter, our charge, so to speak, than that particular introduction necessarily did. So,
Can I just add
Yeah.
one thing? I'm assuming that our mission here is to satisfy the charter, but also not to be constrained by the light plant's concerns about power overload or rework that they may have to do just to receive additional solar.
Right.
I think our goal is find it, identify it, make it available knowledge-wise. If the light plant has issues because of balancing or overloads or other things, that's outside of this committee and they're gonna have to deal with it,
Well,
or how do we?
I
how do we
really,
how do we manage
think that we have to bring that inside the fence.
Yeah.
Because, it has been a constraint of doing anything. That the distribution system has constrained us from really doing anything of
Right.
substance. Even the 1.3 megawatts that are being installed over the new CMS
Right.
require that a battery system be
Mhm.
installed on
Over.
site in order to prevent potential, downstream problems with the distribution system. So we cannot ignore the complexities of the system. We cannot probably not force too many requirements onto it, but we can hopefully strategize with the light plant about how to move forward kind of together in terms of developing more solar and at the same time, making the distribution system a little more robust to be able to accept it, because you may really be able to decouple the possibility of adding solar and maybe putting storage elsewhere, or having consolidated storage in locations that are good locations for storage, like they may be treed and they may be okay, and they may be great for the distribution system because there are nice strong lines that can accept a lot of energy at a specific location, but it's a terrible location for solar, for example. And so that kind of decoupling may be something that would be helpful.
Right, so when we look at a particular site, if, let's just say we find a site that has, 3 megawatts and we could do it, right?
Yep.
And the first thing that's gonna come up is you can't add it to the system. You have to solve for that problem as part of your
I believe.
solution.
I believe.
So that you would have to have any solar site that adds any more power to the system would have to have an ability to be, have no impact to light plants, reliability or feedback or any, therefore those costs would have to be borne inside the solar assumption.
Mm,
So I think you're asking the right questions, in my opinion. I think that we need to take the analysis of limitations, impediments and what have you, all the way through to the solutions for those and the costs of those.
Right.
So if we take storage as an example, storage is expensive stuff. If we don't, sort out a storage approach, including a strategy, if there isn't one,
Okay.
we would be missing half the cost of
That's what
the
I'm trying to get at.
situation, and
Yeah.
we'd be missing the revenue implications of it as well. So
Right.
we need to do all of that.
Although if I read correctly, the power plants report, storage is an alternative.
We have to keep one door open. Yeah, just one, this open meeting law rule. Which one? Doesn't matter.
Well, that was
Oh.
open. Yeah. Well, I came in that way.
Okay.
Like,
Okay,
it's
fine.
public.
Okay, fine, I'm good.
Right.
Good.
The competing one,
We're fine.
which I think has a lot of promise, but has some costs associated with it, separate costs, is reselling
Yeah.
surplus
Right.
energy. And so we need obviously to find a way to work cooperatively with a flood plain to look at the most effective way of adding the energy that we're going to recommend in ways that are going to work best.
It should be on the table, absolutely.
And you know what, I think that's why Laura and Dave are here, because that is a topic that the light plant is working on, right? So we need to collaborate and discussion. This is a plan for 2030, right? So we have time. Those are really multi-year things that we have to do, and they'll come into play as our strategy, and it might just be
What
that
happened-
that project needs to be
what
prioritized later,
happened if
right?
we invited them to have a representative sitting in our meetings?
Well,
They are.
They are.
Yeah.
I don't see Laura on.
Well,
the-
Dave Wood, who's the
Dave's
director
here.
of the light plant,
Yeah,
is
Dave's
here,
here.
so if we had a question, we could
The
ask.
simple question is that we're looking at we're looking at solar to be implemented with all its implications carried with
All
it
it,
when we
yes.
do analysis on costs and impacts. It's not just the trees, it's the light plant, it's the other things,
Everything,
all in solutions.
We need
Related to
system
that.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah,
right,
that's
and
all.
the ROI
Yeah.
has to take it all.
Sure.
We may be able to disaggregate the way we think about it, so that we think about the distribution system as having its own strategic approach
Right.
to
Yeah.
being in a position to accept more solar as the distribution system. It's independent of this site or that site or any site. And then think about individual sites as having their own, development, et cetera. It depends on whether we can do that and disaggregate that into a strategic idea, and thinking about the distribution system. I think I'd prefer to see us be able to do that, but
When you say disaggregate, I'm not sure I understand.
when
what
I
you're
say
saying.
disaggregate, I mean, if we're looking at a solar implementation, we are able to see that the distribution system is developing a strategic approach to be able to accept more energy. And it is independent of the site that we may be developing.
Okay.
So disaggregating meaning the strategy and approach being looked at as the distribution network is more global and is more resilient, so that as we look for sites, they are in parallel developing a way that those sites can come online.
Okay, to translate
Just-
that,
yeah.
translate this a little bit for you. I mean, there's two ways to do this. One is to say, we're going to develop some independent sites that are basically self-supporting in terms of storage. And it simply has ends up having no material impact on the grid.
The grid is what it is, and this thing
yeah,
can't hurt it.
The
Can't
other-
hurt it, right, right. In
The other
essence, you
strategy
create it,
is to
you have to
say-
store it, and you can hold it until the grid can accommodate it and receive it in some safe fashion.
Well, so the other way to
Or
look at is
uses
to
it
say,
on
we
site.
ought to have
Yeah.
grid strategies that work and that support solar.
And on
So
that
Grid
point,
strategy may be, it may be, grid strategy may be storage
Mhm.
that's independent of
Right.
any individual site. Maybe these are shared resources.
Right.
I don't know because I'm not a storage expert, but
Right.
I don't think, to your earlier point, I don't think we should be locking ourselves out of those kinds of discussions.
I would agree.
And again,
Yeah.
again, CMLP is here to say
Right.
that is part of their independent strategy
Yeah.
too, so we
And-
need to be aware of that,
on
right,
that
and the
point,
status of that.
in reading their very interesting
Mhm.
report, we're in a strange situation in the town of Concord.
Pardon me?
We're in a strange situation. The demand for electricity, contrary to every expectation I would have had, is going down, not up.
Going down, yeah, for now.
Yeah, it's,
And they believe for some significant time in the future, the amount of the surplus is amazing. So we could handle any load that any of us can imagine if we can afford to and do resell it to the grid.
I think reselling to the grid is part of the financials. We're gonna have to have financials rolled up for what we
Exactly
propose.
right.
So, if that's one way to do it, that's one way to do it. I think there are obviously problems with challenges, let's put it that way, with that approach, but certainly it ought to be looked at.
To clarify, sounding back to the grid, do you mean in the town of Concord or back to Eversource?
Eversource.
Yeah,
Outside the
And so, and
yeah,
outside the island.
it's tougher because maybe Brian can speak more to this later, but there's a lot more that would have to be done to be able to sell.
Oh,
to
big
Eversource.
time.
Yeah, a lot of engineering.
It's played
A lot of engineering needs to be
But-
done, and some.
I think we have-
that we need.
It
I
does
think we
not
know
seem
what-
to be
what needs to be done
staggeringly
to do that.
difficult.
so actually, Dean, so maybe a future agenda topic that maybe Dave or Laura can speak to, what is the current strategy for the Eversource? Because they started to look at it, I just don't know where we are, is the light plan progressing in that? And then the other piece is battery storage, because that was also part of CMLP's strategy. They had it in their game plan, but as Charlie mentioned, battery storage is ridiculously expensive. So, it's been delayed because it is so expensive, but that's an independent strategy that CMLP has. So
Interestingly,
getting a
battery
status-
storage is expensive,
Yeah.
but it is more likely to pay for itself than solar. Because of the way in which batteries can help us to peak clip and do other things. And mitigate some of our forward capacity
Yeah.
charges, et cetera. Battery storage has a fairly decent payback period. And so that is what actually in the analysis of the CMS program, the battery, when you did the solar, all the arrays for 1.3 megawatts, the payback period and the net PV, MPV was not as good if it was just straight
Absolutely.
arrays. And if you put the battery in there, you get a much shorter, better MPV and
non-trend.
shorter
Yep.
payback or whatever. So batteries, standalone batteries are actually cost benefit
Yeah.
in a much shorter time frame. So batteries it's a different discussion, but
Yeah, I guess to that point of disaggregation, right? So
Yeah,
there's some other,
yeah.
there's just many moving parts, and
Yeah,
just so
yeah,
this
yes.
team needs to be aware of what some of those parts are.
And the other fact is, as solar itself did for a number of years, batteries are on a steep downward curve. So the cost of a given amount of battery energy today and let's say 3 or 4 years from now, should be radically different. That's another factor that's.
Well, that's what we said 5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure about
But-
but
Yeah, and I also think that if we're looking at batteries,
This
mentioned, we should
resilience piece
consider
too,
electric
yeah.
school buses, batteries that have a part-time job of moving kids around.
Yes.
But so I think it's important to keep, whether it's electric school buses or mini grids or just overall resilience of the system. I think it is important to keep that holistic view in mind.
Keep the whole.
Keep
So the whole system in mind,
So-
whether.
we're sort of like getting on to item 5 on the agenda.
Yeah.
Which is your dual track idea, the high priority project versus strategic planning, and we're sort of dribbling into the strategic or batteries. We're not even talking about solar right now, we're talking about batteries. So I'm gonna sort of take us off of 4. I think we'll close that out by saying that for the moment, we'll use the charge as our core introductory, flexible enough document for how we, how we're gonna operate and what our goals are, it's got enough little clauses in there that gives us chances to operate pretty flexibly, keep everything going forward.
I'm just gonna, do you mind if I add quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Phil had brought up earlier, I want to make sure on the record, Concord's electricity demand has decreased significantly, but there's likely going to be increases with electric vehicle charging and heat pumps, things like that. So it's important to keep that outlook in mind that it's likely going to increase. in the
On a
future.
multi-year basis, but at least from where I read, the impression I have is not in the immediate future,
Depends on how you define immediate, yes, but I think we should keep that in mind.
several years.
The uptake of heat pumps and electric vehicles is going to drive significant use.
Oh, there's no question.
Winter use of a heat pump is a significant driver of electric demand right now. Everybody's worried about summer use where there's air conditioners going on, but then the number of degrees difference that you need to keep your house at in the winter is much greater than it is in the summer. So if people are using heat pumps in the summer, in the winter, it's going to really drive electric demand. So let's talk about what I characterized in the last meeting as a dual track approach. And Phil was getting at it right away, which is that we find a high priority project. And I don't want to belabor this concept, but I think that as we go forward, our agenda should include a project that we are trying to focus on, a set of sites that we can shortlist and then identify something where we can, throw a few darts at the wall. We may not have all of the financials perfect. We may not have everything that we want to make the absolute perfect decision, but we want to make progress. We want to be able to say, what I would like to see is exactly what Phil was pointing at, which is by the time we end up at town meeting again, if we can have something on the warrant that says we'd like to do X, or we need funding to do Y, the opportunity for that, it closes on like the first week of January when the warrant closes. So if we don't have something prepared and ready to go by then we will have another year where nothing happens in Concord. And I would prefer not to have that be the case. So
So do you want to discuss this list now, or are you just discussing the fact that we're gonna have 2 tracks?
right now, item 5 is just like that we're gonna have this 2-track approach. And the second track is where we step way back and we look at all of the factors that are in front of us. Where are the possibilities for sites? Gavin's done a lot of good work there, so I want to compliment him on that. But we also need to understand these technical constraints. We need to understand the strategy that CMLP is going to be engaging in. We need to really dig into the financials. When you're talking about the difference between what appears to be about $1 a kilowatt for ground mount versus $3.50 for canopies, that's not nothing. That's a big difference, and how that would play in terms of long-term costs and the expense that the ratepayer would ultimately have to bear. So
Well, following exactly that line, if we are to be successful in the short and long run, we need to build public support. Fortunately, we're in a town where solar intrinsically is very popular. Part of our mission, whether you say it or not, is the PR aspect.
It's not just the PR aspect, it's the, it's, you know, finding a way to navigate local resistance. So
Right.
if you say we're gonna put solar on a specific site and the neighbors directly around that site say, not in my backyard, how do we just say tough? We don't. We have to find a way to convince everybody that not only is, you know, is the globe melting down, but Concord really needs to participate in trying to find a way forward. You
So
know,
you're talking about building popular
we're
support.
trying to, well, not just popular, but hyper local support. Hyper local, where a particular site is found to be somehow acceptable, whether you provide some sort of, you know, screening around the site to prevent it from, you know, just being right out next to a chain link fence, whether you know, whether you have the site, whether you pick sites that are by definition sort of tucked away and not really in people's faces. It just depends on what we need to do to find our way forward with individual sites. And I think that some of that, as I said, is working on a hyper local basis rather than on a whole town-wide basis, because the whole town can say, yeah, let's do it. And then the 10 neighbors who are impacted the most,
On the
where's
other
their
hand,
voice?
on the other hand, when it comes to low-income housing, a good example, you will always have some residual opposition. So the name of the game, I believe, is to get popular support generally and locally. You'll never have 100%.
As a person who at one time was concerned about the turf field, literally almost in my backyard, and lights being put up on there that would be run, you know, around the clock, I tried to resist. The town just said, nope, we want this turf field built. We want these lights to be on until 9 o'clock every night, and tough. And one of our neighbors literally had to come in front of the assessor's board and say, I would like my property to be devalued because these lights are on in my backyard all the time. And the assessors they knocked some value off their property. So, you know, these resistors don't necessarily win, and sometimes they're really impacted. So,
Yeah.
Holding off on the notion of one win,
Yeah.
the one
Yeah.
property that we go forward with. I think we're going to come forward with a portfolio of projects or portfolio of sites with the backup on those sites in terms of cost.
Mhm.
So this can be rolled up, presented as a complete solution that gets us as much of the additional 11 megawatts as we can get. And that would be rolled up financials, be rolled up storage.
that's on the
You rolled up
strategic,
everything.
that's on the
That's
full
all part of
report and our strategic.
But at the end of the day, I think
Yes.
that's where we have to go. I don't think we want to get caught up in this property by property thing. I think there's gonna be some of that, but I think we've got to keep our eyeball on the fact that we do need this portfolio, and it needs to not, it needs to have the right characteristics financially.
But yes, but just to get back to Phil's point, Charlie, the downside of that ends up being shelfware, where we've provided this portfolio, and then how many of them ever really actually get implemented? You
Does
know,
it become shelfware if it goes to the town and the town votes on it?
That's what's happened in the past.
you know, so we need to.
You're not going to live long enough to
Yeah.
go to the town with each individual property and have,
Right,
you know.
No,
So-
but the answer may be, first you get your foot in the door, which means a successful project. You're still working on the next one and the next one, but you need an initial success.
that is the track A, high priority project, and we want to make
that one a success. And we want to get, and I personally
Right.
want to see that,
Agree.
I want to see that on the warrant by the end of this year. So we're going to need an agenda item at each meeting where we are identifying from a short list, some site, and then working through the technical, the financial, et cetera, details of how do we get to that end line where we have a warrant article saying we need X in order to do this, to make this happen. It shouldn't be that hard. We have.
We
some-
need X to do this one site, or we
To
need
do this
X to
one
do
site.
this 11?
It's
That's-
just-
That's
No.
just track A. We need X to get this one site.
The
built.
warrant has to be for this, trying to get something done,
Yeah.
implemented, right?
Yeah, right.
We have, I mean, we have a report due to this, actually to the client action committee and to the select board for the 11th,
Right.
right? That doesn't, and
Yes,
with an
but-
implementation plan, with our,
Right,
that
with
kind of
our,
stuff.
with our
But
backup.
the
for-
warrant article is the one-time implementation.
That's right. But our charge says we need to show progress. There's
Right,
a
and that's
line
your
in there that says
evidence
We
of
need to show
progress.
progress, so.
Right.
We're what, the fourth or fifth committee with similar charges, nothing's ever come of it. So we have to.
No,
learn
you know
from
what,
I
I
wouldn't
just,
say
you know,
that.
It's-
I agree with that, because
nothing
we
came of
did
it
two-
because
we did two
we've done some
significant-
large solar
yeah, we did two
implementations. in
large
town.
solar implementations since the 2010, 2011.
But did they come out of any of these committees?
Yes, they
Yes, they
did,
did.
they absolutely
Yes, they
did.
did.
Yep, both
So
of them did,
let's,
yep.
let's give
Yeah.
some credit where credit's
Right.
due, but,
Yeah.
you know,
Okay, I just learned something I didn't know.
yeah, yes.
But
So-
I think Charlie, you brought up an interesting point where, and we should talk about this as a task force, whether or not it's that one priority project or whether it's a one warrant priority projects that includes 2 or 3. So I think we have to think about, is it gonna be a one, or if it's on schools, do we do it for 3 different schools
Right.
at the same time that we get all done in one warrant?
Maybe we can get some value out of, a larger buy, so to speak, because
Yeah.
you're doing.
The number one should not be a constraint, but
Yeah.
something that can be.
Well, it's be
I-
feasible
I-
too.
yeah.
The short
I
term.
don't think,
right?
I don't think we have any disagreement
Yeah.
on item 5 on the agenda, which is this dual track approach.
Yeah.
So let's move on to item 6, which is a high priority project, and what kind of priority and criteria, et cetera. So Gavin's done a nice job with his spreadsheet. And if you want to bring it up, that's fine, but before we get into that, what I asked at the last meeting, and I don't know, Dave, if you want to comment on this, but we would love to hear your view, and if there's a map that could be provided. My understanding, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that we have 2 bus bars and one is strategically challenged. More solar would be very difficult to implement without actual storage associated and all kinds of special requirements. But the other one is a little more available and could accept some solar without special characteristics. Can you comment on that? Is that a bad assumption, or am I just, off base? What's up?
So, yeah, you're correct. There's 2 buses, right? Each has a transformer feeding it. One of the transformers goes down to less than 2 megawatts of load during the saturation period. So that is a challenge for us right now. The other transformer during that period has about 5 megawatts of load. So there's a little room to wiggle for additional solar on that side, but I would say probably no more than 2 to 2.5 megawatts.
That's fine.
You would
So
have-
I don't know that we've seen too many sites that are at that scale, so let's.
But we're okay going up to 2 megawatts
2
without,
megawatts.
without storage.
But wait a sec, Dave, what side of town? I'm like, I
Yeah,
think that's
that's
the
it.
issue,
That's
it's a
why I'm-
geography issue.
I'm looking at the map. I
Understand.
want to know where that's feasible. Where's that bus bar? What's served by that bus bar?
Let me put together a map that doesn't release any confidential circuit information and get that to you.
Okay, that's great. That would be helpful.
Are you, just to clarify, are you saying that on the side that's got the tight bus bar that we could add 2.5 megawatts and not have a problem? Or are you saying it's on the other bus bar that 2.5 needs to be located?
No, the first one, we really can't add any right now because we're below 2 megawatts. The other one, we were around 5 megawatts during that saturation period, so, we could add 2 to 2.5 megawatts, but anything more than that is really gonna put us in the same situation we're in on the other transformer, so that's where we need to be careful.
Well, could
Okay.
could I suggest that we take Gavin's list and give it to you? And have you go through each of the items and tell us whether it's bus bar A or bus bar B?
That's
Because
fine.
we have a bunch of sites. We don't know whether they are in the good bus bar or the challenge bus bar.
Right, Dave, you should have the spreadsheet. I distributed an email, so you
Yeah.
should have an actual Excel spreadsheet, not just the PDF that was part of the meeting notes. And if you could go through that and add a column, to that saying which bus bar those particular sites that Gavin's identified are on, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay,
Beautiful.
So
I
Dave,
can also do it if he distributes it.
well,
Dave's going to do it.
You don't get to know,
yeah, exactly.
you don't get to know the underlying.
Reasons.
It's
or the
Yeah.
a
location.
security issue.
Got it.
No, it is.
Or,
We're happy just to know whether
We're
it's
just
on bus
happy to-
bar A or bus bar B, because
we don't need to know the actual geography. If you can do that, Dave, the geography is less important than the,
Rather than feeder lines in bus bar, do feeder lines, not bus bars, because that way you know 1 through 8, which ones are saturated.
feeder lines.
is that another, I guess I don't understand that, so.
Okay, so this is a new concept, feeder lines, Dave. What, can you just describe feeder lines versus the bus bar itself?
I'll just identify the parcels that can be utilized based on the transformer. I'll keep it simple.
Okay, that's fine. Okay,
so that would be the less challenged bus bar, but not all of the sites that are associated with it,
sounds
the
good.
subset. That's good.
Sounds fine.
One of the reasons we just heard about transformers is I understand that today the waiting times for getting additional transformers has gone through the roof.
Yes, multi-year lead times for common transformers that we use for example.
We better go with hydrogen.
So Dean, can I just have one other question, and maybe Gavin can speak to this? When I started looking at your list,
I
and
can share it as well.
no, I got it. But your numbers differ from Laura's. And so I'm just wondering if there could be some reconciliation between the two in terms of the output, because if you use your list, it's like, oh, I might go there, but then Laura's cut it down. And she's got more knowledge on some of these sites, so that's probably why, but I don't know if that's something else that could happen as part of that spreadsheet.
I would say the power output column is a lot less helpful as compared to the approximate square footage, because the power output is just on an estimate on current efficiency of solar panels per kilowatt multiplied by the square footage. So that could change based on what solar panels we can get
That's why,
and
yeah.
how efficient they are.
Yeah.
So the most important column is probably the square footage, just to understand the
Right.
the area.
Well, when you
Gotcha.
list square footage, you're listing square footage of panels or of roof or ground or?
Yeah, so I put it in the assumptions here, but basically it's just of the area that's not covered by trees
So
and is like
it-
buildable land.
It's ground,
Yeah,
it's ground square footage.
yeah, or like rooftop area of the roof that's not covered by utility
Mechanical
box.
equipment or something.
So it does exclude sort of the utility box stuff, the stuff you can't put solar on.
Yes,
top.
however,
Okay.
it's rough calculations based on
It's
what
rough.
the GIS
Yeah,
square footage
okay.
tool is, so.
Okay, cool. That's good. Thank
So
you for
that to
clarification.
me is the key criteria is
Yeah.
can the distribution system accept without constraint
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
a specific site and the capacity that that site might be able to generate? And
Right.
Dave's going to try to help us understand which sites we could shortlist.
Yeah.
So that would be really good.
Since our high priority project wants to be in a location that is
Right,
not going to
feasible,
cause any impact.
Right.
Well,
Any impact on light plant?
On the light plant
Infrastructure.
at the
There's
moment,
gonna
right.
be
Yeah.
other impacts that we can.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
just-
absolutely.
we're still working on that same agenda item of the high priority project, and we're
Right.
finding how to make it.
Optimally feasible.
Feasible.
Sooner than later,
That's an important question,
Yeah.
like, so obviously, if we do private partnerships, that opens up another avenue. There's also the question of, do we do on conservation land, but then that leaves more
Yeah.
wetlands, things like that, when we can talk about.
So to this point,
Yeah.
your work, and now we're gonna try to true up between your work and what Laura did in that report. But there's a third element that could be brought into play here, and that's the survey that was just released by the state of Massachusetts, which is this technical potential of solar power. And a lot of A-grade sites in Concord happen to be on private land. They were over on Baker Avenue area in that space.
Yep.
So if you could look at the GIS maps linked in the agenda, or you could also look in, you can look in our GIS, because I asked the GIS administrator for Concord to add this technical potential of solar categories A, B, C to our GIS system. So if you go into the People GIS system that for Concord, and you click down through, I've forgotten exactly where you ended, maybe under conservation, and there's a bunch of other things that you could see under conservation, like wetlands and this and that. But then there's solar potential, and you can then click in there and it'll give you all the stuff that comes off of the GIS story maps. Now, there's a lot of detail in the GIS system that Massachusetts is contracted for. It identifies agricultural potential for every parcel. It identifies wetlands, wellheads, et cetera, all kinds of constraints, which would show that a particular parcel, while it might be good for solar, is also good for these other purposes. And that was not imported over to our GIS. Only the solar potential was imported over to the People's GIS. So you want the true deep detail, you got to go to the GIS story maps, because there are stories about agriculture, embedded CO2, hardscape. There's all a bunch of other story maps that are part of that website. So it's a very powerful and cool thing. I mean, it's amazing the survey that was done of the entire state. Every parcel has been scored for its solar potential.
Now, related to that is something I know essentially nothing. Namely, as you know, being widely used in various places, there are independent solar companies that have gotten their own financing and have offered private buildings a no-cost installation and a sharing of the electricity. Is that something that we should be looking into, because that means no cost to the town, and that's entirely on existing private? Somebody know more about than I do, which I know very little.
So, yes. So Brian,
Brian does
I'm
know
happy to
more
let
than
Brian
I do.
speak to that. So we have a member of the public here who can kind of answer that question probably better than anybody at the table. So I'm gonna give the floor to Brian Foltz.
Sure.
Just identify yourself.
Brian Folds, 33 Riverdale, currently the chair of the Light Board, but speaking on my own behalf. The array, the landfill, and the array near the bus depot were both done with a third party through a power purchase agreement. So the company put up the money, did that, and Concord Light agreed to buy all the production at a certain price. What you described was a behind the meter system with a commercial entity that you cannot do in Concord because it's third party sales of electricity. So you can do a loan, or you can do an equipment lease as a way to have panels with a low capital outlay. But you can't set up a contract where they install their equipment and then you buy per kilowatt, because that's what Concord Light does. They sell the kilowatts. And that's the way the laws are written in chapter
And
164.
the sale is only to Concord Light?
If the sale is to Concord Light can enter that, but it'd be called a power purchase agreement instead of a lease.
Okay.
And they've done that on a private lot out on Virginia Road. There's an office park out there. And Concord Light has a power purchase agreement for the roof solar that was put on these office buildings. It buys all the power and then sells it back to the office park.
Importantly, it's wired such that the production goes to the street first. And then you have normal billing going to.
Right.
The reason I'm raising it is, in the end, one of our biggest constraints is capital. Therefore, if
We
the,
get pretty good terms on buying.
true, but still a limit.
I agree. It's a major challenge, capital, totally.
And therefore, if we can find a way such as you outlined,
As we did with the landfill and with the other Kearsarge installation over by the busty for the 5.4 megawatt.
and so I would think that that may be part of our charge of looking into that area. Because there's a lot of private properties that are suitable, and it takes a lot of capital.
Well, I think we should probably look at this 164 issue. And I think we should open the kimono, or whatever expression you want to use, on approaches to situations like Baker Avenue that enable us to create an attractive play for private money to come in and do this.
Right.
Now I know what you're saying, Brian, around 164, and that's what the light plant does and so forth, but it's our light plant. So,
As long as they're involved in how it's wired and in the person putting up the capital and owning the equipment is working with Concord Light.
absolutely.
That
Of
should
course
be
they would
good.
work with Concord Light.
But if you can't, like a lot of solar installers in Acton, you could work directly with the solar installer, lease the panels and no capital up, kind of installation. That's just not possible here.
But we don't have a lot of behind the meter commercial stuff going on in Concord, do we?
No,
And I think that, whatever the reasons are for that ought to be explored, because, I don't think we're going to find, the kind of space that we want, on publicly owned land. We're gonna need to,
And we don't need
like
to.
the Baker Avenue situation, that's just massive, and I'm sure they're interested in working with us. And I think we've got to be thinking about how to make this attractive so that we don't create our own indebtedness on all this
Right.
stuff. We can't, I don't want to be too pushy on this, but I think we've got to be very careful about the debt burden we create, even with the fact that we get reasonable terms and all this kind of good stuff. We've got to find the slickest way to do this from a financial point of view that we can find, and that includes the storage strategy, that includes private investment, that includes all of those things.
Sure, I will push back for 1 second on that, and that is that those two power purchase agreements that we have with Kearsarge on both of those lots include them being allowed to sell all the RECs.
Right.
And so
we're not
Concord
gonna-
is very, very green oriented, and we would be unwilling to enter into a similar arrangement where we would lose the control of the green certificates.
Well, we want to control that, certainly, but you want to make an attractive, you want to create an opportunity framework that people can come in on and help us out. But certainly, we don't want to sacrifice the green attributes for
Right,
this
exactly.
cause, because why else are we here? We're here for
Exactly.
the green attributes, so.
Yeah.
But I just think there's a book that needs to be opened on this, and it hasn't been so far.
So just to bring us back to topic 6, which is the high priority criteria and short list. Dave's agreed to go through Gavin's spreadsheet and identify sites which would not be detrimental or impact the distribution system negatively. And hopefully we can come up with a group there that we can discuss at our next meeting and talk about a short list. Because that's really what we need to do on the high priority project. Is
And
what
it's-
kind of,
And it's worth looking at Laura's comments about the previous research on all those sites too, because there are some that come to the top, and it's like, some might be hard, but
That's
that we
right.
should
right.
focus on those.
Yeah.
And I want to call out too that it's the criteria for this Excel spreadsheet
Yeah.
is town-owned land,
Yeah.
non-wetland, non-conservation, for the Virginia road exception. So that means that the Concord Corporate Meadows over there isn't included
Yeah,
right,
Yeah.
in there, but that could be a potential.
right. But I would appreciate it if you would take a look at the really blue highlighted on this technical potential thing. Because there is a fair amount of it over there on Baker Avenue, and there's very little else. Otherwise, it's mostly like, oh yeah, it's kind of okay in this space, but
Well, how many of these Baker Avenue kinds of sites do you think from your little foray through there, do you think there really are?
The little Genrad building is the big one.
Okay,
Which one is that? What's the name of it?
It was owned by Genrad. And it's now got about 10 different companies in it. And it's very big, and it's got a flat roof.
Dean, could I speak?
yeah,
So we're actively working with that company to
Oh.
put solar on that roof already. We actually had a meeting with them earlier this week, and it's gonna be probably a little over 3/4 of a megawatt can go on that roof.
so.
there's our project right
There
there.
you go.
We don't need to go further, we're done.
We're done.
We're done this year. We're done with the short-term project. I'm serious. Well, let's probe that a little.
No, but I mean, there might be funding. Yeah, I think we should. And so maybe Dave, you could
Add it
speak
to the list.
more to that in our next agenda.
Yeah, I
I
can.
think including it is an interesting idea. Omitting town-owned land. From an image point of view is probably a mistake.
I don't think we're omitting anything. from
No, I don't-
the
I think-
plan. I think we're just trying to find the best priority.
Let Phil sit again.
Yes. The idea of having an initial project such as this one, on privately owned land is a good one. As long as the high priority also includes at least one publicly owned site. It's for image reasons.
You know,
Sense to me.
I know that we've heard at town meeting from high school students, from others who would just like to see something very public and very visible that we are making progress. Canopies on a school, canopies in the high school, solar panels on Alcott, something that says to students, the youth, to people who are driving their kids to school every day, hey, we're doing something. It's on the buildings that we own.
Exactly.
You know, we own. So that we've heard that, and I think we need to pay attention to that.
But, you know, let's not skip over the fact that we can pull Dave's project right
Over
into,
the line.
right, pull this right into this process here.
Yes.
I think we all agree.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good.
I think so.
So Dean, actually, it just struck me that there was also a question I had about the BD Center and the town doing a feasibility study. Somebody had said that in the public hearing, that like they said they were gonna, so it'd be good to get a status update on if that's really happening.
Yeah, I hadn't heard anything about that, so it was a good question.
The last
I mean,
The last
it's probably on the bad side of town, by the way, but it's just worth getting an update
The
on.
last conversation I had,
Yeah.
which was probably probably this winter. You know, Anna was very, very enthusiastic about going ahead with behind the meter and including some funding in her own.
Yeah, she spoke about it as a
Yeah.
feasibility study this year in her budget. But
Yeah,
she was pursuing
and
it, so I just wasn't
Question,
sure.
I guess I wonder whether the Weston and Sampson study includes
Oh,
that,
yeah.
that solar, but there is a way to do it there. We already have plans. So.
It's probably on the bad
What-
side
what's
of
the
town.
plan?
No, it's,
Well, go ahead and speak.
yeah.
I know,
I think we
I
have
really,
all
I
the
really,
sides on this.
we're, you know,
Okay, good,
Brian's
good.
not a
Yeah.
member, and
So-
I appreciate
So
his.
whether you can do
his
BD or not,
presence.
whether you can do BD or not has something to do with this bus bar issue in terms of
Yeah, I know it does. I'm
getting all that
just
complicated
question.
stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if the rule is that we can't add any more on this side, that kind of,
But you remember, this is a 2030 plan, right? So we can't, nothing's off the table. We need
Oh,
to
oh,
understand
okay.
where it all is, right?
back to the-
It's immediate, yeah.
Let's come back to the
Yeah.
immediate.
Oh, no, I wasn't, but I just think we should, again, it's more just keeping tabs on where all these activities are or not. That's all.
There's a precedent, I know because it's on our house. We built, because our house was oriented the wrong way, we had to build it on open land, on our land. And we have 2 meters. We have one that we are making the electricity, it does not go through the town. And the town is not getting a surcharge on that. And the other, of course, is Well, sorry,
It's an SREC meter, or production meter for your array.
yeah. And so that's the way it's already done.
We know how to do BD. We just don't, the light plant just can't handle BD.
And I think that that's in a spot where the bus bar won't.
That's the bus bar,
That's
that's
the
the
bus
bus
bar
bar problem.
problem.
So you could say, well, we can do dedicated storage on that site and then smooth out and do all this kind of stuff, but then that gets us into the whole storage strategy and it
Well-
becomes a bigger ball of.
Yeah.
So
But-
it-
Somebody solved it with the bus bars because our surplus energy is sold back to the town at a lower rate.
Well,
but if you can't do BD, can you not do, is the high school on the same?
Right.
Well,
bus
we
bars? So
have,
the
we
whole
have the
site-
high school, we have BD, we have all the stuff on that bus bar that we can't do
Okay.
without an overarching strategy that
Gotcha.
solves
Okay,
the.
so they're both the same.
It solves the, you know, the grid problem associated with these
Right.
solar peaks.
And that will be helpful when Dave can
Yeah.
add on the information to the sheet to figure out which is which.
Well,
absolutely.
just as an aside, I don't know if this is okay to introduce this now, but it would be nice to have the studies that the light plant has done on storage and what the written documentation is on the storage strategy for the town. Something must exist. I think there've been consultants that have done stuff. Wouldn't it be nice to?
Yeah, Dave can give an update, I guess. part of
Do we
it.
have everything already in the reports that we have, or is there more updated?
We don't have any.
I don't think
we
that there's
have
any
that.
storage, really, any storage information in the reports that's.
No, there
that
isn't.
We've been
No,
providing.
Why
but
don't
the
you
light
ask
plant's
Dave?
been looking at it, right,
Dave's
right, I don't know.
Dave, to answer what we have in terms of what's already been developed in the way of a grid wide.
Well, we both
Storage
work for
strategy.
the same town. That's the answer.
What's the answer?
Both the municipal light plant and ourselves work for the same town.
That's right.
So maybe Dave can touch
Hey,
on
Dave,
what
would you
we
like to
are or
comment
not doing on battery at the next
storage and
meeting.
whether you have any, reports in your pocket or consultants, analyses.
Documentation, strategic stuff that's been reviewed by the light board and so forth.
Yeah, no, we're early in the process on the battery. We've met with a couple different battery storage providers and consultants. And we're really in the early phases of that. So don't have a lot of documentation that we could share. But I can look and just see if there is anything. But right now, it's been more meetings and discussing what our needs are and what we're thinking about.
And what's the time frame for this process?
I'd have to look back at the strategic plan. I think that was 24 to 25 was the battery portion.
24 to 25, where you would have some strategic stuff sorted out.
Yeah, a calendar year. That's when I think that was slotted in, but I'd want to double check that.
On
Because
the other hand, the question that we've been also talking about is sharing with private owners and what the possibilities are. Do you have information that would be useful on that?
yeah, I mean, we've been talking to private owners for commercial solar and we started with a site that could handle about 1 megawatt. We talked to them about solar storage, EV charging. They liked the idea until the financials came up and they said it wasn't in their financials. So we actively know that if we're going to add the amount of solar that you guys are talking about, private land is going to have to be a part of that as well.
Is there any chance we could get an update on different contacts you've had with private developers? I know there's already to the Middlesex Green rooftops. Any other status report on what's going on with the Gen Red and things like that? That would be much appreciated if that makes any sense.
Yeah, maybe on the next agenda, Dean, if you want, I can get a little stuff set up and we can go through a little bit more of it in detail.
Okay.
We don't want to duplicate what you've already done.
Understood.
I want to just clarify as well. So, currently the town does not produce its own power technically. So the current solar is through PPAs. And is there anything that's barring the town from having its own power generation? whether it's solar or I know battery storage is sometimes clarified technically as power generation when it gets added back to the grid. I want to make sure we don't have any restraints on.
CMS is generated by the light plant, right?
Like
CMS
plants
was-
are able to be vertically integrated.
Perfect.
Eversource and others are not.
Yeah, just want to make sure that correct.
What's CMS?
Concord
Middle
Municipal,
School.
Oh,
the
The
new,
the new arrays. that
Right,
we
right.
built there,
So
they're gonna be owned by the town.
The town can invest, I mean, or the CMP can invest in material and the people
yeah, just want to make sure there wasn't any like,
to generate their own
any
energy.
problems.
so if I'm hearing correctly, there's no legal limitation on the town generating through solar power.
Correct.
Any amount of electricity it wishes.
I believe
Correct.
that to
I
be right.
think that's
yeah.
correct.
That's important.
Hope so, because we've been doing it. Just checking.
Technical limitations.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, we're not, because of the PPAs.
Oh, that
you're
doesn't.
Wait,
Because he's saying, yeah, we currently don't produce any power technically because there are outside power producers through our
no, but
PPA.
with the CMS,
Yes, CMS will, that'll be our.
the CMS template, that's what I said a minute ago, the
So
CMS
there's no
template
legal prohibition.
Yeah,
is fully allowed.
And we're already pursuing one, which is CMS, and we already have Willard, which is like a demo.
Well, which is what, 2 panels.
She's like at 50 kilowatts or something.
Yes.
Yeah, 48.4.
Matters.
It's generated by the town though, but anyway. All right, so I think we have some things to do for the next agenda for the high priority project. We're gonna take a look at, Dave's gonna provide us with updates on the short, to try to provide us with a little bit of a short list. He's also gonna give us a little update on what's going on over at Baker Avenue. We're calling the Genrad building or whatever, wherever he's, having some discussions. And if we can find out anything about the BD, and what's going on there, that will.
I wrote and a little note just asking
Okay,
kind of what's going
so,
on.
those are some quick updates on how we're gonna pursue next time around when we come back to visit the high priority project. Now let's talk about strategic planning. How's our time here? We're
good.
We're not in bad shape. We're not in bad shape. We're running 15 minutes behind. That's good. Okay, so, in terms of what we have accumulated, and I'm just really pointing at Gavin over here, who's done a great job. I think that it would be helpful for us to expand the baseline data a little bit more. And, the addition of potential non-public land would be helpful, but also perhaps some overlays to indicate the level of forestation or the other potential impediments that a site might present, such as wetlands or whatever. I think you've sort of categorized them as blue, green, and like yellow or.
Yeah, that was just by either rooftop, canopy or ground mount.
Yeah. One open question I have in terms of baseline data is that the state map seems to have some constraint around wellheads. I think that the state technical study that they did and how they categorize suitability, I'm going to have to look into that a little more closely. But wellheads and the half-mile area around wellheads, I think they're somewhat displeased about the idea of just populating those with arrays because of the possibility that something might run off that might ultimately, in the end, impact water supply.
And Laura commented on that in her analysis. She said that there is no technical reason why we can't do that, but people might get nudgy.
All right, well, the state seems to be nudgy in there.
Maybe that's changed since Laura did what she
Are we
did. but-
dealing with defining a new category of non-polluting uses? If
I
we,
don't follow that exactly.
okay, around a wellhead, we clearly don't want anything that's gonna pollute the wellhead.
Well, that's the
Right.
problem.
Right.
Does the stuff
Yes.
degrade? Does the
Yes.
panel degrade over time, or does any of the material degrade? And
And then you had.
And I'm assuming that's technically an answerable question. You may have to. include
well, it
that
may
in
be
the-
answerable in terms of what they know now, but it's like PFAS and everything else that later, seriously, you know, all of a sudden you discover that, oh my gosh, galvanized steel creates this reaction, you know, blah, blah, blah. You know, now we're in deep mud.
But
So-
most of those well sites are forested anyway,
They are.
right? So they're
I
already
know
off the
that.
Well,
list.
we got the big one over there by Alcott.
The one
Yeah,
behind
that's-
Alcott
that's
is
the problem.
really, and also within the half-mile trajectory of that is the CCHS campus.
Yeah.
Which is really, would be sad.
Bus bar, same.
Documentation. I asked something about
Yeah.
format. Now, the state stuff had a different set of headings and had a
Yeah.
different structure. You know, they had different sort of columns.
Yep.
And Gavin has the columns that
Right.
you produced the columns that you thought made
Yeah.
sense. Now, I don't know whether we want to have consistency to the state approach with the addition of the bus bar information, or whether we want to roll around. It's just, it's an open question.
So you mean, in terms of, like, on the state's GIS, what the
Well-
name of the columns are?
Well,
I'm gonna share my screen for just a second, just to show you the state. Let's see what I can do here.
Also, just a question, when you're mentioning, Laura's analysis, is that the draft?
Her draft
Yeah.
2.0 that was part of the meeting packet this week.
perfect.
Well, then,
Sorry.
I can
Yeah, that one, yeah, just making sure.
We have all
There
kinds of
you
stuff
go.
we can
You
give
don't
to you.
have.
Just do.
I don't have a place to post it because our website page didn't have a place. So I
I've
just,
already emailed a request for Gavin's spreadsheet, so go ahead and send me any materials.
Yeah, I sent it over.
I'm just gonna show this is the state's map.
We have to
And-
keep drilling into it. Yeah.
And if you click on a given lot, I don't have street names here. This happens to be a blue lot, blue is like ideal. So here's all A, if you see where my arrow is, all A is like, this is like the highest, the best lot you could have for solar is blue, is dark blue. And so this particular lot that I've got I don't know where it is a municipal government parcel in Concord, Middlesex County, and it could generate 23 kilowatts of building mounted solar. Now, that's a very large lot for just 23 kilowatts of
yeah.
building mounted solar. So I don't know where this is, but they have categories of agriculture, biodiversity, ecosystem, CO2 grid, and slope. And they categorize across all of those vectors. And the map is literally down to the parcel level. So here's another
So
blue
you
lot.
can't extract this
The
data.
biggest one-
You can only just.
I
do
can
it.
talk to the people at our GIS department and ask them, Neil Frothingham, I
Okay.
think is his name. And I can ask him if he could extract this data on a, spreadsheet basis for all the parcels in Concord. And we could probably get this. So here's a site
Yeah.
that says other residential parcel in Concord that could take a certain amount of ground mount,
Mhm.
canopy mount, and building mount, 226 kilowatts of,
Wow.
of building mount. And its agricultural criteria is B, and it's rated for all these other things as A.
So A means it's suitable for.
I don't know what those A's and B's mean in
Comparable.
terms of those other characteristics. So I need to drill into this a little more, but this website is linked in the agenda this week. And it is really a startling piece of work that
So
the
what do
whole
you think
state has
about,
been mapped in this way.
what do you think about using this model and plugging Gavin's data into it? Or does that not matter?
As I said, I've asked them to already export. What they did was they exported the general color grid. So
Okay.
you don't have the low level detail that the
Okay, I
state
see what
map
you mean.
has.
Okay.
So you if you go to our People GIS, you can get this green, yellow, blue level of capacity or, you know,
Classification.
classification, but you cannot get this very low level where they've already literally gone through and rated the potential capacity in kilowatt hours.
When you say we can't get it since it exists, who's blocking it?
Nobody's blocking it. I didn't say we can't get it.
Just-
It's not on our People GIS, but they were able to pull across just this category set of stuff. I will work with them to see if they can extract our parcels, which there's not that many parcels in Concord. It's, you know,
Yeah.
a few
That's right, there
thousand.
aren't that many
There-
parcels.
There's not that many. It's several thousand, but it's not a 100,000. And each of them could have a row on a spreadsheet that has this kind of information. There's no reason that it couldn't.
And
So
the
they're
really
called-
small
they're called
ones,
columnar. I'm presuming that this can be done, but I tried to get this information myself. And the way that this is done by the state, I do not have the tools at my personal disposal to pull it out. So I can ask the GIS guys to help me with it. They will be able to pull it out, I'm pretty sure. So,
if we're talking about thousands, would it make sense to make it easier for them by having a cutoff, for instance, 50 kilowatts and above?
what I would probably say is we would probably want them to pull the sites that are probably the most productive in terms of their categorization, like go for the A and mostly A sites, forget about mixed suitability, mostly C, no solar potential, forget those sites, you know, don't take
I'm
those.
also saying there's some tiny ones there.
Just, yeah, I'm guessing.
And this
These
is,
are all private parcels, these guys here, we could all, you know, like
so
this.
this has the commercial stuff in there.
This is a single family parcel. Now, I'm over to Acton now, so let's go back to Concord. How about like all these sites over here, all these are like Concord, you know, single family parcel. It's got an 11 kilowatt capacity on the roof.
So are
Of the
we
house.
interested in those low numbers? I don't think
No,
so.
probably not.
No, probably the big
Probably
ones,
not.
yeah.
So we can find a way to just shred it down very quickly to a reasonable
Yeah.
number that can be managed and we can look at. But all I'm saying is that this is a very
Powerful.
exhaustive study that the state has
Yeah.
undertaken.
And did they do it before? Did I see something
This
like
just came
This
out,
one
I
did?
would say within the
Okay.
last 2 months. This was published by the state in the last 2 months.
I created the spreadsheet back in May, so it's.
Maybe
before it came
that-
out.
Yeah, because I thought I saw something from 10 years ago that was similar.
The only thing I would caution is, sometimes I'm playing around on this GIS is that it's not as granular of details we need. Some of the sites that are labeled as conservation, like when you go in through the Massachusetts GIS, it just clumps the non-conservation and conservation land together into the
Yeah.
potential capacity of a ground mounted site. That's my only worry.
Okay,
So they may put forward some which turn out to be useless to us. Okay.
Yeah, potentially. So we should have to keep an eye on, if we look at it, we should also look at it with maybe, like have both just this site up that puts all the numbers and our
Yeah,
Concord
yeah,
GIS.
yeah.
our Concord GIS has click-throughs that show conservation restrictions.
Yeah.
So we should make sure to have both for pulling the numbers.
Anyway.
Good point.
Okay.
So that is just a possible way for us to, you know, create additional
Yeah,
baseline
yeah.
data.
Yeah,
So that's, you know, in that strategic planning mode, we can assemble a much more comprehensive list along a number of other vectors. And we're not adding into that list anything that remotely feels like, you know, we're making subjective choices. We're
Yeah.
just using really baseline data. So that, I think that's an important thing we can do going forward.
From the sites that Gavin's identified in that, let's just throw blue sky. If every single one of those was implemented, what was the potential for all of those sites? Do we come even close to 11?
It depends on which scenario I said for efficiency, but, yes, if we
Yeah,
build every single.
19, if you look
Yeah,
at the bottom line of the spreadsheet, it was like
Yeah.
19.
That's what I'm trying to get at is, you know, if
we
we're
build-
not in a situation where
Built everything out.
11 is completely impossible.
No.
However, I'd say
It's very
building everything
difficult.
is like it isn't feasible, especially in the short term,
No,
so.
I agree. I'm just saying, you know,
There's a
bracket the
lot-
problem a little
but
bit.
there are a lot of small
There is
ones.
some potential here.
Yeah.
and it's difficult to get there,
Well,
but.
so amazingly, that study that the state put together indicated that there's enough solar potential in the state to satisfy every electrical need that the state could possibly imagine that it needs. Now, the chances of us being able to build that much solar capacity in the state are also about zero. So, but what the study does indicate is that the land is there, that the possibility is available, and that it could be done, but.
If all other resources were
Yeah,
unlimited.
if everything, if everything else was free,
One of the
and
biggest
time was-
pieces of land that is widely known is the one that Nuclear Metals used to have.
That's the one.
That's
we spoke-
2229, yep.
We're gonna,
Yep.
Charlie's gonna be our observer on that.
Yeah.
So we're also
229.
at 229 Main
Yep.
Street.
Okay.
That's nuclear.
Because
And our capacity to do anything there is really contingent on the town's relationship with the EPA and the ownership of the
Yeah.
land, so that, while we're continuing to plan forward as though we are going to take ownership, we may not. And so,
I'm
We're
wondering,
sending our ambassador. over.
yeah, we're sending us.
I'm wondering to what extent our state representative can be helpful in that.
They're engaged.
I don't know that we need a lot of state representatives. It's really among the select board, the lawyers, and our potential exposure to downside
Yeah.
risk,
Yeah.
that would impact our willingness to go forward,
So it's not a case that the state is dragging its feet.
No, nobody's dragging their feet. It's really all controlled by the federal government. The EPA is cleaning it up to a residential standard. And when they're completed, and they're actually consulting with us saying, if we turn this over to you, how do you want us to prepare the site in its final form? We are going to make it residential standard, but do you want it to be this way for commercial buildings? Do you want it to be this way for athletic fields? What do you want the last few feet of the soils to be? Do you want it to be gravel with nice topsoil, or do you want it to be
So
underlain?
if we used it for a solar field, that would reduce the work they would have to do.
It is potential that would reduce the work that they would have to do.
And that's what Charlie's gonna add.
So if I could say, Concord hasn't sorted out what it wants,
It wants.
and that's what we need to
Right.
do. I don't know the state of the committee. I think they have got some good people working on it, but what we need to do is get our interests represented and heard.
Yep.
Right.
And, see.
Yeah. And it's very close to the light plant's substation. So it's a good place to
On which,
put.
on which bar?
It's a
I
one-
don't know, but it,
All of them.
but it would be a good place
Yeah.
to put a strategic storage facility if you were gonna, and it
Yeah.
would potentially have a small footprint and just be part of the site. And you could do
Yeah.
a lot of other things with the site, but we could have a strategic storage facility over there if we're willing to invest in battery storage. So, and it would be close to the action at the substation.
Same with electric school buses. If we were ever to put batteries.
And they're also
They're
very
right near
close to the
the-
substation, exactly, so. All right, so the next piece of the puzzle is how do we engage with the whole bus bar problem, technical constraints, and how do we approach that? I know that that's really, Dave, you guys are always thinking about that. But we need to really come up with an approach so that if we're gonna imagine another 11 megawatt capacity of solar to be added to the distribution system, okay? Doesn't matter where we put it now because the distribution system will be challenged. There's just no way to do this without impacting the distribution system. So I think we need to come up with a way to understand how we're going to allow that to enter the flow. And as we go forward, I think we're going to have to work very closely with you, Dave and Laura, to really come to terms with the fact that, if this is going to be any more than shelfware, like the other numerous studies that we've done, that we need to engage with the reality that some significant changes are going to need to be addressed.
There's a puzzling aspect from this study from the light plant, the capacity used in Concord has shrunk.
Mhm.
Has it shrunk by at least 11 megawatts, in which case, at one time, we were able to handle that much from our present equipment, so I don't understand.
Okay, so I'm gonna give my, uninformed but best guess on that, Phil. And that is that we are contracted to bring in electricity, we'll call it the base load of electricity that's got to come in, and we contract through Eversource and then out to the ISO
Right.
with various providers, and we have contracted to have that much minimum coming in. And so if today the amount that we expect to need is much less than it was 5 years ago, we're only contracting for what we need. But if we then produce too much on the distribution network, and there is more coming in, plus the added amount that is being produced, we create a position where there's more electricity on the system than anybody's electrical outlet is actually pulling off the system. There's
Okay.
less demand than there is energy flowing on the system. It doesn't matter how much actual electricity or energy it actually is, not a question of how much, it's a question of balance.
Okay,
So if
here's
it's
what,
imbalanced, it's not going to work.
here's what I don't understand. That may be obvious to everybody else, but not to me. We used to use more capacity, so therefore our grid within the town was set up to handle more power. We haven't cut it physically.
No, but what we did at that time was we contracted with the New England providers to send us more than we are contracting to have sent into us
Right.
today.
So it just means a change in contract. It doesn't change the
We're
physical.
producing a lot more
structure
solar
within
than we ever did
Yes.
before, and that's
Well, the
causing
problem
more
is the
problems.
added solar.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
the fact
we
that
added.
we introduced something that the model wasn't designed to handle.
Right.
Right.
Model's designed
Yeah, you're right.
to buy power
You should
and
have
distribute power.
Right.
It's not designed to generate power and distribute the generator and, and.
One-way
and be
system.
a power maker.
Yeah.
So that's the,
The concern is that if we ever get in a situation or close to a situation where we get to that breaker situation where if it seems like we have too much and we're feeding back, we're gonna trip the system.
That's right.
Let's
And
just
we'll fail.
this is what I think is,
throw it all away.
that's-
You can-
But that's
it's
obviously not the goal of the
self-stretching.
same.
Right.
Right.
that's what what our problem is the fact that the storage stuff is not gonna go on until 24, 25, and we're here now. We're highly dependent upon this storage strategy to do what we're gonna do. And to make our calls and to go to town meeting and explain things, I believe. So I think, and I think there are other,
Let the.
besides the storage, there are other things to talk about, like curtailment.
Yep.
Yep.
And shipping power outside of the grid. So it's not necessarily, we're not necessarily constrained by storage per se, but got the big unknown because we've got the light plan with a much longer time frame to figure out its storage strategy.
But in the end, and you mentioned two other approaches to that, you could ship it back, you could curtail it, you could store it and then, let it out later. So one way or another, we have to come up with a strategic approach to solving that problem. Now, that strategic approach, let's assume, for just the sake of argument, that strategic approach involves storage. We've put a toe in the water with the CMS system. We've decided that 1.3 megawatts is more than that bus bar that it's on could accept on those light days. And therefore, we needed storage. So we include storage in that implementation. Okay, but the question then is, how's that storage managed? Is that storage managed in a way that would be consistent with another site that also has a battery and another site that also has a battery? These should not be small islands of batteries that are just put up willy-nilly just because we're putting in more solar here.
Right.
We need to, in effect, disaggregate storage from production. and manage storage as a thing. Now, Green Mountain Power in Vermont has a distributed storage model. If you're a homeowner, you can put a Tesla Powerwall in your house and they will manage it. They will, if they need to protect their system, they will have your Powerwall accept storage, accept electricity. If they need to clip a peak, they'll take power out of your Powerwall, and they have a broadly distributed battery storage strategy for their distribution system. Okay, that's a strategy. That's a way.
That's what Dave is supposedly working on.
Right, that's what Dave will give us an
that's what
update
Dave's
on next,
So,
yeah.
you know,
So in the interim, could we explore other models like curtailment?
Right, can we?
I
can
hate
we
to
just-
throw that out, but.
Can we shut off this stuff
you
solar
could
if we
shut
needed
off
to?
the- You shut the site off at the.
Understood, but I mean,
From
then,
a national point of view, does this make sense? Wasting,
well,
Well,
we also realize that if.
let's all
Risk
see,
mitigation.
let's all talk about the frequency at which this
Right,
occurs.
exactly, is it?
Right.
It's almost never
Right.
filled. This occurs 2 to 3 days a year.
Right.
And only for a few hours. When the sun is producing, nobody's using their air conditioner, everybody's out for the weekend, the office buildings are all shut down, and it's a Sunday and it's May. It's like 2 days a year where this is really, really a close call and a problem.
0.5%.
Yeah, you curtail it and call it a day.
But it's
You know,
That's
catastrophic.
not accurate.
No, that's not, I know, but.
That's
it's-
not accurate.
Perfect, yeah.
Yeah,
So
It's
Dave,
not
maybe you
accurate.
should speak. to
Okay,
that.
then speak up,
Dave.
Dave. If that's not
No.
accurate.
So it happens every month, when the sun's out and it's mild out, but you're right that it doesn't happen, every day. But, we look at the loads every month and we do have the situation in each month. The worst months are the shoulder months, the October and the April. So that's where your statement, Dean, applies most to, is those shoulder months where it's the worst. But it's a constant problem right now.
well,
Do
that's,
we currently curtail
Yeah,
solar?
do we do any curtailing now?
So we can curtail, but we're gonna be in breach of contract and we're gonna have to pay a fine.
PPAs, we're required to accept the energy
Yeah,
that
but-
those two
But they
big
could
arrays-
curtail CMS.
You could curtail anything that they own.
That's right.
Right, you own it.
If you own it, you can curtail it.
So one of the questions becomes, do we want to push the pedal on getting implementations before we have the complete,
well, to the
complete
extent,
golden strategy for storage?
to the extent that the numbers work out, which I don't know. Obviously, using the surplus for the rest of the country by feeding the grid is certainly something that is well worth looking at.
Well,
Absolutely.
so
Could Dave speak to that actually next week too,
Yeah.
the selling
Yeah.
back to the
Right, so-
Eversource, and it's more
right,
just. a
so on this point of technical constraints and approaches, Dave, let me just tee you up to talk to us about the exploration of the tariff changes and feeding back to the grid, and also the technical and expense components of that. Laura had some paragraph in there that was all yellowed out, like, I'm not quite finished with this paragraph, but there were some big numbers in there, $1 million for this, 500 grand for that. To put us in a position to be able to do that. But then in addition to that, we have to renegotiate our arrangement with Eversource, that's, et cetera. So if you could speak to that next week, that would, in our next meeting, that would
And we also want curtailment.
Right, we want some statistics on curtailment. If you're hitting a problem every month, or you're hitting it for a couple of hours, could we have some idea that, for a total of 2 days a year, you would have to curtail any additional solar you put on at the moment until we can fix this problem, in which case that curtailment may go away if the system gets upgraded? Because if we're saying that we could add anything we want, as long as we curtail it to protect the system, is that a viable strategy?
Well, we can add 2.5 on the one bus bar.
Right,
So we got that. If we can
That's to
find the
do our,
sites.
that's to do our quick project.
If we can find our sites, but on the bus, the challenge bus bar, which is where the sites are.
Yeah.
Could we implement a curtailment strategy on an interim basis until we got all the storage stuff
Right.
fired up and
Right.
And how does that impact the
And,
financials?
how does
What
that
opportunities
financial-
are there?
See, the problem with this is continuing to wait. That's the problem.
Yeah,
Wait.
I'm trying to clear the
And,
runway.
You know, we've been waiting for,
Yeah, yeah.
thank God we have this little team going now. This is nice. I'm pleased with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, these are the big questions, is we can't do this because it'll upset the grid. Well, how do we deal with it?
So
There's
we-
curtailment, there's,
Yeah.
you know, there's.
We put in our ROI that because of curtailment, it'll take another
That's-
year to pay
that's
off.
right, that's
Something
right.
like that, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
baked into the system that we've,
Or you
Yeah.
have some losses that, you know, early in the game.
Well, we know.
And we get, in a couple of years,
But it's
get the
built.
storage rolled in
Yeah.
and we're
and
looking better.
recoups itself.
We
Yeah,
know that sooner or later, we're gonna have to expand the grid anyway, as was pointed out between electric cars. And heat pumps, it's inevitable. So we don't wanna have something that's gonna be good for a very short time unless we have a longer term solution in place.
Right.
All right, so
I
we
agree.
have some follow-ups for next meeting on
We
the,
also-
on the technical constraints.
We also understand how the grid is currently controlled, how the grid is networked. Is there any network control over these various resources? Is there a way to communicate between the light plant? This shows my ignorance because I don't know, but is there a way to communicate between the light plant and potentially the CMS? Or potentially
Like the
BD,
battery.
or potentially, you know, WR Grace or the landfill. Can we look at these? Is this a network?
I know that some new equipment was put in several years ago on meters so that there could be remote control.
well, no.
That's a totally.
It's a whole thing.
So yeah, that's a separate thing, but you know.
You can communicate back and
This
they
idea
have some
of
control.
of a networked set of grid resources.
Yeah.
Storage being one of them. I don't know, I mean, is that something people talk about? I don't even know, but I think Dave, it would be helpful if Dave or Laura would talk to this because we don't have.
I don't know what the acronym means, but SCADA, SCADA is
Yeah.
a system that
That's right.
I don't believe we have in place.
Well, I didn't want to say it that way. You know, so, yeah, you could have a SCADA and you could have intelligent devices at each of these,
Right.
each of these.
We all
endpoints.
know it's state of the art, whether we have it or not is a different question.
It's
All
on our
right.
Well,
5-year
are we
capital
gonna have
plan.
it and when and how would it impact what we're talking about here? So let's get this stuff on the table. And let's get Dave or Laura to talk to us about, you know, our grid as a set of network resources that are centrally controllable.
Well,
Is that okay? Dean?
that's,
why we're meeting twice a month.
that's under,
That's why we're meeting twice a month.
that's right. That's under approaches as
Right,
opposed
yes.
to constraints.
Oh,
Yeah,
That's under,
oh,
that's
I'm
under technical constraints and approaches.
Approaches.
So-
I was on the right bullet there.
Right on the- you're right on the
You
money.
Just finish the sentence for them, that's all.
Right on the money. Anyway, all right, we're over our 8:30, but that's because we started 15 minutes late, but I want to touch briefly at least on financials. I think that it will be incumbent upon us to develop some kind of financial modeling around how these things are going to play out.
Yeah.
Laura has clearly done a lot of work in this area, and we may be able to encourage her to help us, or we can develop some resources ourselves as just sort of, you know, starting points and have her critique them. But one way or another, we're going to need to be able to show, you know, oh, we're putting up this many kilowatt hours of capacity and it's going to cost us this much to build it. We're going to have to pay this much in debt service and we're going to have to do this. Models like that were built for the CMS system. They were presented at hearings. So there are resources that have been created to do this work. But we're going to need, as we think about individual sites, we're going to need to think about these kinds of things so that the reality is right in front of everybody. What's
We need to sort of create a standard model that we can sort of plug in and.
Oh, hopefully, I mean,
Yeah,
it
should be
it
able to.
should be something that can be done in a way that's generic enough that
Right.
you go to a different site and there's enough
Right.
variability or capacity to change factors that you can then just reuse the model.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely believe that.
There's one opportunity that I've heard about, which is to piggyback on what's going to be done with middle school. That specifically applies to canopy on parking lots. Unfortunately, the numbers don't look terribly good. But if we wanted to explore that, we probably could get some significant discount based on quantity of numbers. I don't know if it's worth pursuing. The gap may be too large.
I'm not quite sure what you meant by that, Phil. In other words, you're suggesting that we would have some buying,
Piggybacking.
some buying opportunity. What we're looking at here
Oh, I
what
see.
is just trying to kind of model the cost of doing a site, and having a financial framework that we can share and understand and use as
And
a
I'm
means of evaluating the.
Yes, and I'm
the
introducing
potential.
one more variable. Economies of scale. We have a project which is still in time to negotiate how much the price would be reduced if we increase the volume. So it exists with the solar parking. The gap between the price of that and other alternatives may be too high, I don't know.
Well, what we have is a set of numbers that are based on other real examples where we basically pull them in. And we based a lot of that stuff on Belmont, right?
Yep.
And we have two very good spreadsheets or two very good financial models, one for storage and one for solar. You can pull them up, see what your aggregate financial performance is.
Can we share that for the next meeting?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's
absolutely.
it's super stuff. I mean, it's actually,
Great
I
to
think
see.
the models we use were actually developed by people at Belmont. Maybe Laura could share those.
One of the reasons for my interest,
I think she may have developed her own models.
I think she did, yeah.
I don't think
Yeah.
I don't think she started with the
We had our own.
element,
separate
yeah. I've worked with you on that. I'm gonna kind of leave that there. I don't have I will try to dig up for the CMS modeling. I'll work with Laura on that and get that out. And I can probably dig up the modeling. Charlie and I worked up some alternative modeling that on some of these things a while back and just distribute that for informational purposes, but it's a starting, it has the capacity to change the discount rate, the payment period for your bond, the kilowatt hours of production, and it degrades the production, as you're going out, you're degrading a few percent per year because solar panels wear out over the long haul. And then there's like step functions in there where you have to replace components as you go out because, pieces of it wear out faster than other pieces. So it's pretty sophisticated stuff. But Laura's work on the CMS it has all of that in it. So we have some really good baseline information that we can start with in terms of that. That being said, we have reached the end of this week's agenda and it's time for public comment. So I will open the floor and I have.
Brian.
I have someone here in the hall, so I'm going to turn it over to you. Would you like to introduce yourself and make your comment?
Brian Bolts, 33 Riverdale. At the end of this month, I'll be presenting on solar models to a light board group. It's a group of people who are on light board commissions and so forth. And our topic at the end of this month happens to be how do you get town with the different business models. So there'll be 3 presentations. I'm doing the one similar to what we did in CMS. I think Bill is doing one about how Belmont did it. And there'll be a third. So that's an opportunity. The other thing is, I thank you. I know I spoke up a lot, but I did my best. One thing that I heard misunderstood, is which of the buses is got the saturation. We referred to the high school and the middle school as being on the saturated bus. It's actually, those are not, those feeder lines are saturated, but not that bus, because the bus that is saturated by the 5 megawatt solar array that's over by the bus depot. That's what's
Okay.
saturated.
Okay.
So that's just a little clarification. But that's why I think it's important to know what feeder lines are saturated versus which bus, because it's a little bit more granularity. It doesn't give away where every line is run, but it does give you a sense of where a new project will go in.
Okay, well, Dave's not gonna necessarily
Yeah.
identify that, he's just gonna say this one is
Yeah.
in an acceptable location.
You know, so
It's safe to say, though, that the
CMS.
high school
Right.
and BD are in problematic areas.
they're on the same one as the landfill, and that's why it's saturated. Yeah.
Feeder line.
That's all for right now.
Okay,
Thank you.
That's,
though.
that's good.
are there any, Tanya has her hand raised, can you introduce yourself and?
Hi, yes, thank you, Tanya Davis, 62 Prescott Road. I have two comments. One is correction, thank you. There is an
You're kind of, Tanya, just 1 second, you're kind of muddy, and either move closer to the microphone or not sure exactly.
Is this better?
Yes, it is, that is better.
Okay, thank you. About minutes correction, thank you. There is one inaccuracy because the town meeting vote for 3 things and
Still really cannot,
okay, can you get me? Yeah?
Better, yeah.
it's a little better.
Okay, the minutes, phone vote refers to tree removals, not tree clearing. And I am mentioning this because you made the change at the time.
We really cannot,
Yeah.
come on, Brian. We really can't.
Can't hear you.
Can't hear you, Tanya, I'm really
Oh.
sorry.
No problem. I'll write to you.
Can you send us another email and we'll catch it by that note?
Gladly. Thank you.
Okay, all right, very good. Anyone else? Mary?
Thank you, Dean. I'm Mary Hartman, 16 Concord Green, Unit 6. I'm a member of the Select Board. I'm speaking for myself. I have 3 things I'd like to say. The first is that the 2229 Main Street Task Force is in fact looking at recommendations for whether the town should take ownership. But in the process, there are a lot of people making claims and promoting our uses for that. So I'm really glad that you're going to have an ambassador there early. There is a public forum that Wendy mentioned that's going to happen on October 11th. So that might be something that the rest of you might want to attend. I think that's a promising site for solar, but that's for you to decide. The second thing is that when you're looking at municipal buildings for maybe rooftop or roof canopies, you want to keep in mind that some of these municipal buildings might be moved or repurposed. I don't think that's going to happen to CMS. And I certainly don't think that's going to happen to the BD Center. But once you get out of that, it's like DPW or public safety. If you're thinking of any of those buildings, you want to talk with town manager and try to get a feel for what's the future of those buildings. And then finally, what I wanted to say was that I've heard you mention several times going to town meeting. And of course, anything that you bring to town meeting will have to go through CMLP because they're the ones that will actually be implementing any of the recommendations that you make. And if any of the things that you want, especially quick wins, require debt, I'd like you to be mindful of the close in the warrant, which will happen in early January. So again, when you're thinking about any funding that you'll need, you need to work through. You've got constraint with the warrant calendar, and you'll be working obviously through CMLP. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Pamela Dritt.
Hi, Pamela Dritt,
13 Concord Green, Unit 4. I have a couple of questions. Is the Baker Avenue 40B development currently considering battery storage along with the solar and the EV charging system that they're putting in there? Maybe Dave could tell me.
You want to answer that, Dave? You don't have to, but if you don't have any information.
No, yeah, battery storage is part of the process for that site as well. And we're partnering with the vendor to come up with the project. So yes, it is planned.
Cool. And if we do have battery storage along with the solar installations that we put in, either residential or town, does that get rid or mitigate the bus bar problem or the saturation problem? Would batteries solve the curtailment issue?
So Pam, I'm just going to ask you to make comments. We're in the public comment. You know, it's not a colloquy here. We're just trying to receive your input. And I don't want to belabor that, but you know, I don't know that we're really in a conversation.
All right. I thought it was for questions too. I definitely think we need to use the electric school buses right away. We need as mobile battery storage systems as well as racial justice DEI solutions, because Metco students and minorities spend much more time on buses. And the American Lung Association has shown with studies that diesel buses poison our kids, both our lungs and the brain capacity. It lowers IQ scientifically. Diesel buses are the most, in many instances, the most polluting places children spend. And they spend a long time on them if they ride the bus to school. And it's worse for poor communities and minorities, like our Metco students. It's just like gas stoves do and lead paint does. So that would be a win-win investment for the light plant, as well as the school system, as well as our social justice investments. Also, if we're not going towards virtual power plant distributed energy generation, like Dean described they're doing in Green Mountain in Vermont, Green Mountain Powers, where we could end up generating, hopefully, at least in the future, all of our needed energy through local distributed generation of solar plus battery backup that delivers energy on the same uncentered system that the internet delivers messages. And so also when we look at the cost, we need to look at it as an investment with payoff, as well as what destructive costs we eliminate, because every time we invest in local solar, we eliminate the cost of fossil fuel generation from out of the area, the entire infrastructure for that, and we produce clean energy. So it isn't just the cost that we make when we put it in, it's also the destructive costs we eliminate by doing that too. So it's a double financial benefit. And when we have it invested enough into our clean electric system, we'll get marginally, essentially free energy. It starts to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper once we're over the initial investment. So I don't think we should let,
Pamela?
yeah, the last point is, I don't think we should let financial constraints inhibit us if we want to change the world for the better, which we must.
Thank you. Okay. Could I get a motion to
I
adjourn?
make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna
Thank you.
close the
And
recording.
time for the next meeting?